an attempt to fill the Lord of the Rings-shaped gap in my life, I watched The Heroic Legend of Arslan. In an attempt to fill the Arslan-shaped gap in my life, I watched Kingdom. And in an attempt to fill the Kingdom-shaped gap in my life, I watched Alderamin on the Sky. Our story takes place in a world that is somewhere between fantasy and steampunk. And while this world does seem to have some smaller nations, like the nation of Alderamin, for which the show is named, the two major nations are the Kyoka Republic and the home to our main characters, the Katyavarna Empire. Our main characters are a few young Katyavarnan soldiers. They are all on a ship together, heading for the exams that'll make them officers in the Katyavarna military, when the ship runs afoul of a storm and they end up in the only surviving lifeboat. A surviving lifeboat which quickly receives another occupant, as our main character, Ikda Salork, fishes a young girl out of the sea, a young girl who turns out to be none other than Shamil, third princess of the Katyavarna Empire. Our protagonists eventually wash ashore in the Kyoka Republic, and they have to get back across enemy lines, all the while concealing the presence of the princess. From there, they get swept up in political machinations and military strategy, as Princess Shamil enlists them to help bring about her goals for her country. Our main character, Ikda Salork, is essentially lazy Lelouch. Sure, he's a great strategist, but he doesn't really want to do anything. In fact, he really doesn't want to do anything, including being a soldier. The only reason that he was taking the officer's exam in the first place was that he could help another participant. Yatiri, or Yatiri Shino Igsum, needed to pass on her first try at the top of her class, so she enlisted her classmate and friend, Ikda, to help her out. He was supposed to essentially help her cheat her way through, and as a reward, she was going to use her family connections to get him a nice cushy job at a library. On the government payroll, of course. One of the things I really like about Ikda as a character is that there is a reason for his intelligence. Basically, Ikda was raised surrounded by scientists, learning science in a world that runs entirely on religion and rejects science as heresy. And so, the logical thinking that he was taught applies on the battlefield. He had to learn to apply it, sure, and we get to see at least some of what turned him into a strategist early on, but it's all about the way in which he learned to think. He thinks outside the box and he thinks controlled experiments, and he applies those thoughts on the battlefield like a chess game. Combine that with his laziness, meaning that he's only ever going to come up with plans which involve the least amount of work and effort on the parts of his men, and therefore the smartest use of that effort, and he's actually a really good strategist for really good reasons. Yatiri is the other protagonist, and she's fairly badass. With her twin blades and her strength, she's well and truly one of the best on the battlefield. She's also incredibly intelligent. While Ikda never wanted to be a soldier, Yatiri's entire life has been about her becoming a soldier. Yes, that was the family line, and yes, she was forced into that role, but it's a role that she's very much made her own and that has become a part of who she is. She genuinely wants to become a soldier and protect her country more than just about anything. Also, I've got to say that her and Ikda make a pretty badass team. His intelligence and her strength, combined of course with their instinctive understanding of the other's actions, create the sort of unbeatable duo team that, in a few years, after they've both matured at their skills a little bit more, could easily be on par with Osei, Daryun, and Narcissus from The Heroic Legend of Arslan, Double Black from Bungo Stray Dogs, or Lelouch and Suzaku from Code Geass. But that's not actually why I enjoy seeing them together. I enjoy their interactions because their relationship is probably the single best thing about the show. The show makes mistakes with most of the things it does, I'll get to that in a bit, but it does not mess up their relationship. In fact, it makes their relationship fascinating. Mainly because it isn't a romance. I know that might be a funny statement. Their relationship is good because it isn't romantic, but hear me out. Ikda is a Class A flirt, joining the ranks of characters like Give and Moroku. As far as I can remember, there isn't a single female character he interacts with without flirting, except Yatiri. There's never even the ghost of a romance between the two of them. And yep, they are incredibly close. I was both really surprised and really impressed to see a writer writing a strong, well-developed core relationship for the story based on two characters of opposite genders who would not have anything romantic between them. It's not every day that a writer is brave enough to do something like that, and especially considering Ikta's character, it was not what I was expecting, so it really impressed and hooked me. The lack of a romance plot between them kept their relationship from getting bogged down in cliché misunderstanding and allowed it to develop along strong and interesting lines while also keeping the story moving. As for our other main characters, let's start by getting to the things the show messed up. Ah yes, Hiroma Becker. Why does she exist again? I really don't know. TBH, I actually forgot she existed for a large chunk of the, second half of the show. And when she's one of your main characters, that's kind of a problem. Her entire purpose in the show seems to be... well, she's the healer character. I guess she knows first aid. And Ikta flirting with her in the first episode showed us that he was a flirt. Yeah, that's about it. She exists occasionally. She's not plot relevant. She doesn't have any character development. She's off screen a lot of the time. She's kind of there. What's the point of having her as a character taking up time when the show isn't going to do anything with her? The way I see it, the show either needed to give her something to work with, some reason for the audience to even remember that she existed, like, say a personality, or just kick her out altogether and give her screen time to the characters who deserved it. Incidentally, I've now spent like a minute talking about her, which is kind of impressive considering how irrelevant she is. So next member of the main cast, Torway Remian. Like Yatari, he's descended from a long line of soldiers. Where her family was a sword family, his was the Remians of the gun. But, well, he's nowhere near as well written. Sure, he's got development, but that development has a little hole in it, and that's kind of what keeps him from being a strong character. Torway's whole conceit is that he's not a fan of killing things, that he's becoming a soldier because that's what he has to do, but he hates the idea of killing other people. His fear leads him to underestimate himself, to think of himself as a coward, and to be self-loathing. He likes the fact that he's a long-distance sniper because he doesn't have to see the faces of the people he's shooting. Really good idea for a character, and over the course of the show he does get braver and bolder about his shooting and more confident in himself. The problem comes with his fear of shooting. For one thing, in the first arc, he shoots a guy in cold blood. And yeah, he's not thrilled about it, but he doesn't have anything like the sort of reaction it would take to suggest to me that, oh, here's a guy who doesn't really like the idea of killing despite being a soldier. And then later on, his brother shows up in the next arc, and we get the basic bully scenario. It's not quite as bad as the bully scenario from Ruby, but it's still really annoying because here's some generic bully villain trying to beat up on him, calling him a coward, and he just takes it. He plays out the role of someone who doesn't want to pick a fight, even though we just saw him kill someone in the last arc. So it kind of feels really forced. Like, okay, if this had come before his first fight, maybe him watching Ikta get beat up would have made a lot more sense. And then also there's the whole Remians of the gun thing. His brother makes fun of the fact that Torway hides behind his sniper's rifle. Thing is, Torway didn't even pick the gun as his weapon. After all, he's one of the Remians of the gun. His whole family specializes in snipers and gun use. So I feel like that point really does weaken his character. It would have been a lot stronger if he had picked his weapon specifically so he could stay far away from the battlefield. All in all, he's a good idea, and he works well later on, but at the beginning, he just felt really badly handled. Of our other two main characters, they're actually both pretty well done. Matthew Tettridge is a soldier whose main conceit is that he's not especially good at anything. He's nowhere near as good a sniper as Torway, he's not as good with the sword as Yatari, and he's nowhere near the strategist that our main character is. And that's his frustration. He can't seem to be the best at anything, which is actually interesting to watch as a character. And Princess Shamil is also fairly interesting, with her own goals for her empire. Goals that may or may not fall in line with the goals of, say, her father. You can argue fantasy or steampunk, but at heart, Alderamin on the Sky is a strategy military anime. And that's where it's both at its best and its worst. On one hand, the strategies, like the one Ikta uses in the first arc, are interesting and creative, and I always love a good strategy anime. On the other hand, there are little holes, places where the fabric of the story doesn't fit together quite right. Like, you'll have a conflict, and the conflict will be well done, but how the main characters got to that conflict, or why they ended up being the ones in charge of the soldiers of that conflict, never quite makes much sense. And it would have only taken a few extra minutes to explain, but we never get that explanation, and that always kind of bothers me. Like at the end of the second arc, when Ikta signals Yatari with the gong, and it wasn't clear if Yatari was the only one who could understand it, or if everyone understood it, but she was the only one who paid attention because she knew it was from Ikta somehow. But then how did she know what it is? Do they somehow have secret gong codes? Or, I don't know. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense. He just, boom, gong message, oh, I hear this thing, and no one else does, and somehow I know this doesn't have anything to do with the mock battle we're in the middle of, where we're enemies. And I just would have liked them to, like, explain some of that, or set that up in some way that made sense. And I know that sounds like a pretty small nitpick, but that sort of thing happens all the time, and after a while it adds up and becomes pretty annoying. As for the strategies themselves, as interesting and creative as they are, I don't feel like I fully appreciate them because I'm never told exactly what the resources of our main characters are, or what the resources of the enemy are. I don't have a sense for the overview of the battle. That's something that Kingdom does incredibly well, and that's something I really missed in Alderamin, since without a sense of the overarching battle or ability sets of the commanders, it was hard to grasp what was happening, and hard to understand whether a victory was amazing or mundane. Overall, again, I think it comes back to pacing. The scenarios went by really quickly, and I feel like with a bit more time and explanation, and dare I say it, a little bit more exposition, we would have actually had a lot more of a sense for the story being told, and I felt like I would have appreciated it a bit more. Both the animation and the soundtrack did a good job setting up the feeling of the world and the world building, but no part of either one particularly stood out. The one possible exception is the show's OP by the Akiboshi Rockets, which is as catchy as it is full of energy. So, did Alderamin on the Sky help to fill the kingdom-shaped gap in my life? Yes. But does it live up to The Lord of the Rings, Arslan, or Kingdom? No. It's nowhere near as good as they are, but it's still quite enjoyable and worth the watch. And that is why I'm going to give it a 4 out of a possible 5 stars. For an intricate, interesting, and well-written world, with colorful characters, and incredibly well-detailed world building. For alternate anime recommendations, let me first, of course, point you toward Kingdom, for a strategy anime done right. And by right, I mean pretty much perfectly. My next recommendation goes to The Legend of the Legendary Heroes, for a fantasy strategy anime with a lot of the same strengths and also a lot of the same weaknesses. Just beware that ending. And finally, allow me to recommend Saga of Tanya the Evil, for another military pseudo-steampunk anime that uses magic and science combined, and a strategically minded protagonist who wants to do as little as possible and get as much out of it as possible, although Tanya is way more sadistic than Ikta. Well then, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you're interested in Kingdom after all I've said, you could check out my review. It's on my channel. Speaking of, like and subscribe to let me know if you enjoyed this video, and leave me a comment to let me know what you thought. And now I have to figure out what I'm going to use to fill the Alderamin on the Sky shaped gap in my life. This year's anime Altair, A Record of Battle. That should do it. If the plot holes don't drive me crazy first, that is. I may have something to say about that in the not too distant future. In the meantime, this is Coriander Stone, and I thank you for watching.